Have you ever tried to prove the existence of God to somebody? Maybe somebody's done that to you. You don't believe in God, or you're just struggling to know what you believe. If you would just allow me for a few minutes to make some very simple arguments. So let me know what you think. Let's talk about it. There's lots of different ways we could go about it. Let's do the appeal on the basis of intelligent design. That intelligent design demands that we conclude that there's an intelligent designer. You can look at the design of the universe, how the heavens declare the glory of God. The design of the human body, how we are fearfully and wonderfully made. You look at the design of a cell, or even down to the code in DNA. Every living cell contains an informational code, A to T, C to G sequences that originate from the sender, the DNA, and is passed to the receiver, the RNA, that translates the meaning of the code to produce protein that helps the cell function in various different ways. That information does not and cannot come from random processes, but from a source of infinite information. How the very evidence of God is manifested in our bodies. Romans chapter 1, verse 19. And so the Bible makes that argument over and over again. Romans 1, Psalm 139, Psalm 19. Consider the heavens, consider the universe, consider your body. How anyone could do that and not conclude that there's an intelligent designer beyond me. But the Bible calls it foolish. Let's just say we're driving down the road and we come up to this newly built house. And what do you already know about the house? What if I were to tell you that an accident happened, a big explosion, and out of nothing popped this fully functional house with everything that's in it? You would tell me that I'm a fool. Because as the Hebrew writer said, for every house is built by somebody. But the Hebrew writer concluded, but God has built all things. That's certainly an argument that we could give. We could also appeal on the basis of a conscience and a rational thought. How do men have any idea of what is right and what is wrong, or what is good, what is evil? Where does that come from? How do we have a conscience about such things? How does man think and rationalize? How do we have any self-awareness? That's what we might call moral law. If a man is only physical, why does he have a sense of moral obligation? Where does a sense of moral justice originate? The fact that there's a law implies that there's a lawgiver, because without a lawgiver, there would be no moral law. If there's no moral law, that means everything's permissible. But because of man's sense of moral justice, man often seeks to do what is right. And if man is only a biological creature made up of atoms and molecules, there's no explanation for his knowledge of what is right and what is wrong. There's no answer for what we call the conscience. That even when man does what is wrong, he has a sense of obligation to make right and correct his moral wrongdoings. Evolution supplies no answer to this. And the argument for God is that he is a lawgiver. Moral law is ingrained within us. It's a part of who we are. We were designed that way. We, unlike animals, were created in God's image, who is a moral God. And because of that, we are moral creatures. That's a convincing argument. But perhaps the most convincing argument for God is Jesus. And here's what I mean by that. Look at a passage like 1 Corinthians 15, verse 3. For I delivered to you, first of all, that which I also received, that Christ died for our sins, according to the Scriptures, and that he was buried, and then he rose again on the third day, according to the Scriptures, that he was seen by Cephas, and then by the 12, and after that he was seen by over 500 brethren at once, of whom the greater part remain to this present, but some have fallen asleep. And after that he was seen by James, and then by all the apostles, and last of all he was seen by me, as by one born at a due season. Paul says he rose and he was seen by men who doubted, who was confused, men who gone from cowards being afraid they were going to die with Jesus to men who would give their lives for him, die as martyrs. And not just 12 of them, but hundreds of people saw him. And by the way, this passage has been a key passage even among skeptics. Back in the 70s, skeptics of the Bible went from laughing at the thought of the resurrection to at very least recognizing this passage's validity, looking at this passage through the historical lens, considering Paul's credibility as a scholar, considering that this passage was written just 20 years after the event of the resurrection itself. By the way, many of the historical accounts that we teach in our history classes that we consider credible were written hundreds of years after they happened. Also recognizing that Paul is very specific in naming these witnesses. That Paul wasn't trying to hide their names, and there wasn't just a few of them, but there was hundreds, over 500 of them. Understanding that many of those who witnessed were still living at the time that he wrote this passage. And also, if you wanted to, you could go and ask any one of these people and say, did you see Jesus resurrected? And these witnesses could either deny or verify their claim. And if you're making up a fairy tale, you can't do that. And many of these people, just by their actions, considering that many of them suffered and even died for teaching about the resurrection, declared it to be true. And considering that mass hallucinations don't happen, this is a key passage to proving and disproving the resurrection. So here's what the Bible claims. God came, people saw him, and he proved himself to be God by dying and coming from the grave 3 days later. And that perhaps is one of the most persuasive arguments for God's existence out of all the ones that we've talked about. And if you don't think it is, then just read the books of the critics, like Lee Strobel, who wrote The Case for Christ, or Warren Wallace, who wrote Cold Case for Christianity, or Josh McDowell, who wrote Evidence Demands a Verdict, or Sir William Mitchell Ramsey, a German historian back in the early 1900s, who wrote lots of different books on the subject. These were men who did not believe, who did not just wrestle with their belief in Jesus, but they wrestled with their belief in God. Devout atheists, all of them set out for the purpose of disproving the existence of God in their books. And some of them spent their whole life fighting against a God they claimed didn't exist. And do you know what happened with all of them? They didn't just come to believe that Jesus was a man. They, in the process, came to believe in God. All of them. And it's almost like the same story over and over again with these critics. All atheists turned believers upon closer examination of the Gospels and the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And that's to say nothing about Jesus fulfilling the Old Testament prophecies, where he fulfilled over 300 prophecies in his lifetime. And that's a conservative number. Lee Strobel wrote about a professor and his students sitting down to figure out the odds of one person fulfilling just 8 prophecies in their lifetime. And do you know what the odds were? 1 in 100 quintillion. And if you don't know what that is, that's 1,000 trillions. 1 quintillion. By comparison, being president is 1 in 10 million. Being struck by lightning is 2 times in your lifetime is 1 in 9 million. Have a meteorite hitting your house is 1 in 180 trillion. And so God declared hundreds of years before it even happened. And Jesus came in the flesh and he fulfilled it. And that's to say nothing of the teachings and the miracles that these eyewitnesses saw and experienced with Jesus. And so I hope that's helpful for you to, something for you to think about. If you disagree with it or if you have a question about it, please make sure to comment down below. Everybody have a great day. God bless.